From the furious roar of an inferno to the gentle dance of candle's breath. Fire. It consumes, transforms, it illuminates. And for animators, it's a challenge. It's a very dynamic element that is very difficult to bring to life. Welcome, my friends, to another animation tutorial. Have you ever wondered how to capture the ever-changing essence of fire? Today in this animation tutorial, we're not just animating fire, we're going to understand the essence of fire itself so that you can animate any kind of flame you desire. Along the way, you will see my process for tackling elements you haven't animated yet or don't know how to, so that you can replicate this for things other than fire. Let's dive into it. So where do we begin when faced with a complex animation like fire? My go-to strategy for anything I want to animate is to first immerse myself in inspiration and references. We're not just looking to copy, but to actually understand, to dissect the elements into its core essence. I always start by heading over to places like Envato Elements, YouTube, and Google Search. For animation, videos are a lot more beneficial as references than photos, so Pinterest might not be the right place, even though they also have videos. I use Envato Elements for all my video B-roll footage and also my animation sound effects and music because it has everything that I really need. And the benefit over some of the other platforms is that through my subscription, I can download the files at high quality and rotoscope them if I need directly on the software that I'm animating, or even just import it into the software that I'm animating to have it as a reference there. If you want to check it out, you can find my affiliate link in the description below. What's key here is when searching, don't limit yourself. Start broad. If you're looking for realistic fires, we might think bonfires and grills, but then let your mind wander. What about abstract fire like we see in movies, for example, the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings? Most of the time, one reference can spark another idea. A new association is created. As I was looking through these inspiration videos, it reminded me actually that it's moving a bit like silken fabric. It made me think of fake candles that have these little plastic bits that move back and forth, or even little pieces of fabric that are blown by air to mimic the movement of a candle. These associations are crucial for a few reasons. First, you stop seeing fire and its movement the way you think it is, and instead you see what it really is, like when you step back to look at an artwork from afar. And secondly, because you are tapping into other objects and concepts that you're more familiar with, meaning you're also more familiar with how they move. Therefore, these associations will make it a lot easier to recreate the movement as animation. Another thing that came to mind was food. I thought about this burners that are used to make creme brulee, or in one of my visits in Austria, we ate Kaiserschmarrn, where you light it on fire, and so I think it's called glazing in cooking, but then also crafts. What about glass churning? So there's loads of different applications of fire, and each of those fires might look different. And here you can see I have created a collection of some of my favorite references, but also contrasting types of fires, so that I can now start animating fire. Beyond just looking at fire, truly understanding its essence means that we need to peek a little bit into the science behind it. Of course, we do not need a PhD in thermodynamics, but knowing a little bit about the basics can really help your animation. For example, how is fire created? How does it come to be? There's this very simplified triangle of fuel, heat, and oxygen. These are the three components that are required for fire to burn or exist. For example, the color of fire can tell you what it's burning and how hot it is. Usually we associate with fires yellows and oranges, but if you think about the bluish flames that you might see in burners or even in gas stoves, these fires would be rather blue, which signifies that they're a lot hotter. Also, if you have a fire that has a blue to red transition, like you see here in the burners, this can also indicate a shift in temperature. For example, in welding, glass blowing, or even acrylic pouring where I use burners, you might see that shift from blue to red. This would indicate that the fire is touching a cool object or a cooler object and therefore bringing down its temperature, so it adapts, but only from the point where it collided this new object. So now we have briefly discussed that the level of heat can determine the color of the fire. Oxygen, or rather air, I would say, is a big part of how fire moves. You might have a candle that barely moves, one that flickers a lot, and this can be due to the environment where it's in. So if you have a candle in a home, there's less likely to be a lot of wind, a lot of air pushing it back and forth. But if you think about possibly in a church where a lot of candles are lit, churches have these humongous rooms with constant foot traffic going in and out, opening doors. They would have a more dynamic movement. Campfires would also have, because they're outdoors, they would move a lot more. And then the fuel, depending on whether you're burning wood or it's a candle that is essentially made out of wax, or if it's a barbecue with charcoal and spirits that you've put in it, all those things will dictate as well, I guess, how violent or how dynamic the fire actually is. Now, with that knowledge and inspiration sources, let's put it into practice. Let's start with the most basic fundamental flame, which is a candle. Mastering this will give you building blocks for a variety of other fires. The candle flame seems simple, but there's a lot of overlapping action which can indeed make it a little bit more complex. Sometimes the candle can flicker, it can sway slightly, it can also remain in sort of the same position, and it's all depending on the wind. At its core, it has like a body that looks like a drop, actually, like a water drop, I would describe it as. And then it has a wispy tip that almost becomes translucent, especially the more air comes through to it, it makes it a bit thinner. So when you're drawing, think there about the opacity that it might have in the tip. The movement of the candle is largely dictated by the surrounding air and subtle currents, pushing it usually back and forth, but there are loads of variations. So select the right candle type that you would like to animate. All candles and all fires really have like a starting point. This can be considered like the boiling effect, the base essentially of where new flames start to happen. And in a candle, there's only that one point at the tip of the candle. Another property of fire is that it always goes upwards. So even if you have fire that goes sideways, that essentially has been blown sideways, eventually it will have a slight curvature upwards. All right, now that we have learned a little bit about fire, let me show you how to actually animate this candle step by step. Before we get into that, let me just quickly show you what we're looking at, or explain a little bit what you're seeing in front of you. So this software is Clip Studio Paint. This is what I have used to animate this. However, this is hand-drawn animation, and so you can use any other software that allows you to do hand-drawn animation. But just in case you're not familiar with Clip Studio Paint, in the center we have the area where you will see the drawing. So down here we have our candle, the beginning of our animation. And over here I have written the number of the frame that we're looking at, that we're going to be talking through. Down here we have the timeline. So you can see that this specific animation goes from frame 1 to 15. I'll go into a bit more details in a moment as I go frame by frame. And the project, it has a frame rate of 8. You can play with that. That's really a bit up to you. It just means that to fill 1 second, I need to draw 8 drawings. So the bigger the frame rate, the more drawings you might have to do. And another project detail here, you might notice it already, I am animating on ones, meaning that each frame has a drawing. You can also play with this until you reach the movement that you like. This is how I have done it specifically for these kind of short animations. It's quite okay to do once, but they can of course take a little bit more time. And lastly, we have over here on the right, the layer. So here from 1 to 15, this is how Clip Studio Paint works. So essentially each layer here is connected to the corresponding frame. But you can ignore this if your software works a little bit different. Let's begin. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to animate this candle with two different purposes. Looking at the candle from frames 1 to 15, we're going to create an animation that essentially runs once. Let me just show you how it currently looks. But as you see, as it loops, as it comes back around here or to frame 1, depending on where you're looking at, suddenly the candle is kind of growing from scratch. So that's why it's not a suitable looped animation. So for those that only want to do the looped animation, we are going to focus on frames 4 to 15. All right, so first, the animation that will play just the once. If you wanted to create a growing candle, your first frame should be either the candle by itself or the candle with just a little blob. A candle is usually a rectangle with a circle on top, or you can look at it as a cylinder. And then it has the wick, which is just literally a straight line. And at the top, in my first frame, I have just drawn a little blob. This is sort of like the candle has just been lit and the fire has just begun. In the next frame, frame number 2, we just want that same blob to just expand a little bit more. And it's already starting to have that kind of droplet shape that I mentioned Also, from 1 to 2, to make sure that the candle is identical, is exactly the same, you should either duplicate it from the first frame, delete the blob, and then redraw the new correct flame for your frame. Depending on your software, you might also want to create the candle sort of like as a background or as a separate layer that essentially is a continuous layer that would show up from frame 1 to 15. And you just draw the flame in a separate layer. Again, this will depend a little bit on your software, but the principle is the same. Or as I said, if you're using some software that is a little bit more basic in terms of animation, for example, I used to do Adobe Fresco a lot before Clip Studio Paint. All you have to do is duplicate the frame and then delete what no longer serves and redraw what you need to redraw. So in this case, it would be deleting the candle flame and redrawing the candle flame for the correct frame. And then for frame number 3, we have then the candle almost at its full size. It's kind of growing, and then it reaches its full size at frame 4. So now from here is where we are going to focus on a looped animation. Let me show you how now that looks without frames 1 to 3. So suddenly it makes more sense to have it looped. There is still a bit of a jump. However, I know that that jump is because it's ending from 15 to 4, because I know how the frames are supposed to look. But if you're looking at this for the first time, this is a very valid candle movement as well. Candles go really a little bit back and forth, and it's a bit unpredictable too, depending on the wind that is forcing it. So don't worry if it's not uber smooth, which is usually something that animators worry about a lot. But in this case, it works. It kind of gives maybe the candle even more charm, if you will. All right, so then how does this look? Already in frame 4, you can see that I have added a bit of a curvature here on the right-hand side. This is because in my mind, I was imagining wind coming from the right-hand side. So wind is coming from this angle. So this bottom section here remains quite round and will remain mostly in the same shape for the entirety of the candle moving. However, this top part is what's gonna give the candle a bit of movement. So when wind comes from this side, it compresses this side of the candle, making it go in and also making this side go out. In the next frame then, as I was highlighting, the wind continues to blow into this direction. And what you might notice is that as this curve is becoming more pronounced, also this curve is becoming more pronounced. So it's kind of getting a bit chubbier on this side while it is becoming thinner from this angle. Take a look. And the wind is coming from this side, but it's not affecting the tip. So the tip is a bit delayed, if you will. So as we're pushing here, this remains in its position. And it's kind of getting pushed over here. Almost as if you're squeezing this here, and therefore this gets pushed backwards and this gets chubbier. In the next frame, then the wind continues to come from the same direction, but it is pulling almost. It is kind of pulling the candle. This is so hard to explain. I'm just realizing this is actually quite hard to explain what makes sense in my head. But I hope it is making sense. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I can say or describe in a better way. Anyway, so the wind continues to blow from this side, and as it is pulling and pushing this section more, as we want to maintain the mass of the fire, it is getting all dragged up. So it's getting stretched a little bit further. This is getting thinner. And this section here also remains still further over here. So we can clearly see that wind is blowing into this direction. So let's just go back so that you can see. This is where it began. And as it's pushed, it gets thinner here. And then it starts to get stretched. Okay. And then finally, and also, by the way, if you want to look at this little tip, I keep saying like it's a little bit delayed. You might even look at these as overlapping actions, or I should say maybe secondary movement. And as the wind continues to push, the tip comes off. The wind is so strong that it pierces through this. Okay. And because of that, we have the tip or the spark, a little piece of the fire that has come loose because the wind is going through here. And as this tip that was holding the candle over here to the right becomes separate, the new tip following this line here is over here instead of here, is more to the left as the wind is pushing through the fire. And later when you add color, you might, if you wanted, add less opacity in this section, because this is no longer connected to the fuel, the what's burning here, which is the wax on the wick here. So you can consider doing that. Now it's going to start to get a little bit overlapping, because we have now not one fire, but we have one fire and this other object that continues to be on the screen but behaves different to this. Because the candle that I chose is the type that kind of sways back and forth, as this wind pierces all the way through, there's a new wind stream coming from this side. And this is why you see that this curve is starting to form. So let's go back here. You can see there isn't really a proper curve here, or let me go back even here. So it's rounded towards the left. It's starting to shift on this frame. And then in this frame, it's becoming more pronounced here. This is because I know that the wind is starting to come from here. As we push further, we need to create the separation between the fire and this little bit. Yeah, you see how close it was to each other? But once it's been pierced through, the separation becomes greater, and also this flame with no fuel, it becomes smaller and sort of floats away towards this direction. Now here on the fire front, all I have done here in comparison to before is just making this curve more pronounced. And as I've said to you at the beginning, this rounded shape here kind of remains the same. So technically you could also draw like a circle that you continuously change the tip of to make this a little bit clearer. So what I mean is you'd have something like so, and then you change the tip. Sorry, I'm drawing with this Wacom thing, and I'm not very good at it. And you can do the same on the other direction, and it just doesn't. Oh, sorry, I'm just not used to drawing on this Wacom tablet. I need my I need my iPad. But anyway, you get the idea, right? So a circle, and then the tip is what really changes. Going back here, so what I'm doing here is pushing this left side, and as we push this side, we also have to curve the other side further. Elongating this here just kind of cases that it was connected, that it's kind of being slightly stretched. It's a little bit delayed in comparison to what's pushing here. So first is the pushing force, and then the tip follows after. Now we have the same principle, but we have three objects. So from here, the wind was so strong that it pierced through the fire again, creating another little fire to be loose, a little like spark to get loose. That means that what was holding this tip stretched here is gone. So that's why it's shortened. And the curve that we were creating here is also lesser, because the pressure of the wind is no longer on this. It pierced through the fire here. This here, this guy, is still the same guy that we created over here, this in frame 7. It just has been shrinking and moving further away. If you just focus on this little blob, you kind of follow the same shape, but just make it a little bit smaller. And then it becomes smaller until in the next frame, it's even smaller, and then it disappears. So whenever you see the X is because I have removed it. I hope I hope that my icons make sense. So from big to smaller, and it disappears. And also, I hope you notice that it's moving further into the direction that the wind was blowing. Okay, and now we have a second one that happened here in frame 9. So this guy here. As the fire gets pierced here, we have a new kind of spark that behaves the exact same way. So we know that the wind direction of it is this way. Why is it this way? Because as the wind was being pierced from this side, this kind of sort of like gets pressed away. I don't know why that makes sense to me, but I hope it makes sense to you too. Because the candle came from this direction, right? So you see how it comes from this direction. And as it separates, this no longer has the same momentum to move to the right. It then stops and sort of moves in the opposite direction almost. This has to do a bit with physics. I forget now what that's called. Is it the law of motion or something, or inertia or something like that? But essentially, that's why it's going slightly this way. And as we progress, the exact same thing as with this other one happens. So it becomes smaller and just slightly moves further to the left. You can see it there. And it disappears. All right. If you need, you can go as well through different passes, because at this point here, we're looking at 1, 2, 3 objects that we're animating and that have slightly different animation needs, if you will. Now let's go back to the main flame. The wind has pierced through here. We have these other 2 guys moving away, which we can ignore for now. The wind still continues from this side, so the curve is becoming defined again, and the fire is getting pushed away, the tip of the fire, right? Like the circle here below remains kind of the same. As the longer, if you kind of start to elongate the fire, the whole body needs to become a little bit thinner, because again, we want to maintain mass. Mass in animation is a super important point, and the reason is it allows the viewer to correlate the 2 different images as being the same object. If they don't maintain the same mass, then it can get a bit confusing to the eye. So if you have a ball, for example, and you wanted it to fly, to bounce, you would stretch it. But so like if I were to stretch it like this, essentially the same height, it just doesn't look like the same ball. However, this is a lot longer than this. So that's why when we start stretching this here, we also need to thin out the roundness here at the bottom. And so as the fire pushes even further, we have yet another little spark coming off. And this one will follow the exact same method as the other ones. Now in this case, you can maybe notice it that the direction is kind of going downwards, like so. So this one will go slightly downwards and then disappear. And the flame itself, once it's broken off, it becomes chunkier again because it's no longer being stretched by the wind. As the wind then goes above the flame, it still puts a bit of force at the top here. That's why this is still a little bit rounded, and this also follows the same roundness just on the other side. Because I wanted the flame to go back and forth, so we started with the wind coming from the right hand side all the way to being pushed in from the left hand side. To make the loop more believable, it has to at some point have wind coming from the right hand side, and that's what's happening here. So the wind is coming from down here, and we can see the tip flipping over immediately, getting pressured here in this side, which curves it this way, and the other side just follows. The principle is the same. It gets pushed a bit further. You see how it kind of gets thinned out a little bit as it's being elongated. But now for the final frame. Now, because this is a loop, I need for the last frame to connect with my first frame. And my first frame is this one. I needed to bridge this frame, 14, with the first frame. And so you need to create an in-between. An in-between is essentially something halfway between this and this, something that connects them so that it doesn't feel like it's jumping too much. So this tip has to become a bit straighter. The whole candle is a little bit larger here. What I like to do is grab the first frame and place that as my last frame. And that way I know exactly what my frame here should be. So it becomes a little bit bigger, a little bit straighter, and it matches a little bit more this first frame, so that when we play it, it kind of matches. I didn't give this guy here much importance. All I did was follow more or less the shape of the candle itself. So if the candle was moving to the left, this also was slightly moving to the left, but it will always remain very centered to the wick. And you can see here how that happens. So here this candle, here in this one, the flame was a bit elongated, so this also gets elongated. Yeah, here it got elongated again, but into the other direction. And here you might notice how it was quite large and it started to settle, so that we went back to this area. So now you should have a looping candle animation, or a candle animation that plays once. With the candle foundation now in place, let's scale it up to a campfire, or should I say, let's overlap it to a campfire. So let's do this very simple. Now we have a movement of a fire, even though it was a candle. Let's forget it was a candle. Let's remove the actual candle aspect of it, and let's just take the flame as it's moving. Let's duplicate this fire 2 more times, and each time we're going to change the size of it, the scale of it, and move around sort of like that it starts a little bit offset so that it doesn't move exactly identically. And already with that, you can see we have a campfire. Campfire will have multiple points of origins and will obviously be a bit bigger than a candle. Think about overlapping actions, but it is still yet the exact same predictable pattern that we just recognized in that kind of back and forth movement. By duplicating the candle fire into different sizes and slightly offset in your animation, you can already create a very realistic bonfire. Now with the animation ready, all you have to do is draw the logs. If you want to go even more realistic, you can create multiple types of candle flames, or essentially of individual flames, and overlap those. That would showcase more chaos, but seems to be a less predictable pattern, even though after we've now observed, it follows the same kind of rules. One thing that might make it as well more realistic is wherever the flames overlap, which you might see as I'm adding here the color, you want to blur the lines where the fire meets. The fire as an element is not a solid object, so it kind of blends into itself, and when it moves away from each other, it can then separate as well. A bit like when you think about water, you might have separate water droplets, but when they come together, they form into one droplet. With fire, it's sort of like similar. Let's take a look at the campfire animation. Now let's animate a completely different kind of flame, the burner fire. Remember those blue flames we spoke about? The movement here is very little. It's all about a gentle flickering and more steady and forceful push. The beauty about hand-drawn animation like I'm doing and showing you here is that naturally you're unable to recreate the exact same stroke over and over. So essentially redrawing that fire, that blue fire over and over will naturally give you a bit of a flicker, a bit of a natural move. And that's what I've done here. The color is absolutely critical in this one, where we have the main blue tone, but there is a more sharp, almost neon level kind of blue, a lighter blue. And so for this one here, I've used Add Glow mode that you can select in Clip Studio Paint, which is where I'm using. Most softwares should have Add or some kind of glowing filter that you can apply to that layer to create that neon type of blue. Apart from the color, another thing that would be interesting to experiment with are your brushes. So I've used here one that is like a air spray but with noise. I really like this. There's another brush which had less noise and was a little bit smoother. So you could also consider using like a soft round brush with the center a little bit more defined, so not as airy in the center. Now let's take a look at this simple animation. Now let's do a brief recap. Whether it is a candle, a campfire, or a burner, or something entirely unique, the process really remains the same when you're trying to understand how to animate something you haven't done before. First, it's To immerse yourself in the inspiration and references, go first broad and look for patterns and also differences depending on the type. Look for patterns and let the ideas and associations spark. Second, understand the essence. Learn a little bit about what you're animating, whether it is the physics, its behaviors, or for characters, maybe the psychology behind what motivates them. It makes something feel more real. Thirdly, break it down. Start simple and then build its complexity. Master the basics before tackling the big inferno. And finally, observe and experiment. Fire is fluid, and your animations should be too if you want it to stick realistically. But you can also experiment with something more abstract, or for example, here there is a different animation where they've used little circles like bokeh filters to create the air creeping into the sides of the animation. It's not maybe as realistic as some other animations, but it does capture the essence of fire. And for all those incredible references, motion graphics, sound effects, and more, you know where to go. Envato Elements is where I go. It's been absolutely crucial for a lot of my projects, and I highly recommend you check it out. As I mentioned before, the link will be in the description below. You can use my affiliate link, which also helps support my channel. And there you have it, the essence of fire, and also a universal strategy for animating anything you set your mind to. I hope that this video has sparked your creative journey and shown you that understanding fundamental principles is key. If you're ready for your next animation challenge and want to explore how motion alone can convey explosive fire without literal flames, then you should definitely check out my tutorial on how to animate a bomb, which shows how I animated an abstract explosion with arrows rather than flames. It's a fantastic follow-up that dives deeper into conveying impact and energy through movement and timing. And if this tutorial was helpful in any kind of way, hit the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss future tutorials. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!